My name is C.P. Rao. I am a professor of marketing at the University of Arkansas, USA. I and two of my distinguished colleagues, Professor Ahroni of Duke University, he is a professor of international business, and Professor Subba Rao, who is a professor of human resource management at the Ottawa University in Canada. We three of us are going to discuss briefly various aspects of the services industries and in the developing countries especially, and also the impact of globalization on the services industries, their competitiveness, and the prospects for the international trade of services industries. Services industries are becoming an important part of every economy today in the world. Especially in the post-industrial societies like United States, services industries have become very significant and are considered to be contributing more than 2/3 of employment and GDP today. Now, in the middle income type of countries, it is estimated that about 50% of the GDP is contributed by services industries. Even in the less developed countries, according to some estimates, it is between 30 to 40% of GDP is contributed by services industries. As the services industries have become very significant part of the economies, there is growing interest and emphasis on how to make services industries more efficient and how to effectively market the services industries. This type of services marketing is a phenomenon for the last 10 years or so, and concurrently there is also growing interest about the trade in services. And this trade in services has become somewhat controversial and confrontational between North and the South. In recent years, United States wanted to bring the services trade within the framework of GATT. However, countries like India and Brazil have raised certain objections, and the different points of view of developed countries and the developing countries have resulted in some sort of a confrontation on this issue. Keeping this confrontation aside, the trends are that there is a growing trade in services today, and there seem to be opportunities for both developed countries and the developing countries in the area of services trade. But we would like to look into, in this short time, some specific aspects of what is the nature of the services industries, how do they differ from the manufacturing type of activities, and how such differences have some implications for human resource management, and what are some of the trade related type of issues which specifically impact on developing countries like India in the area of services industries. I would like to ask Professor Ahroni what he thinks in terms of the differences between services industries and the manufacturing industries.
I think there are mainly four important variables that one has to take into account. The first one is that goods are tangible. You can touch them, you can feel them, you know what they are. Services are intangible. And because they are intangible, they are very difficult to measure, very difficult to keep control of, and sometimes very difficult to measure the quality of the service. The second difference is that services are inseparable. One can produce a good, put it aside, and wait for somebody to buy it. With services, you have to have the service at the time the consumer wants it. I mean, if I want to sleep in a hotel, the hotel has to be ready for me to sleep, and after the night, then this service is over, and the service is done simultaneously. Because of that, one cannot have inventory of services. And services are, and that's the third important thing, perishable. The night that was not used in the hotel cannot be used again. The airline ticket that was not sold cannot be sold after the flight has taken off. Fourthly, services are very heterogeneous. We're talking about enormous amount of different human activities. For some people, when they think about services, they think about servants, about somebody who gave the service to a master, as it used to be in England maybe 200 years ago. Services are of totally different kinds and many different kinds. Some of them are very capital intensive, like airline industry, where you need the airplanes, which is good, of course, but still needed in order to give the service. Some of them are very skill intensive, like research and development, like advertising services, like management consulting, like auditing, and so on. Some of them are very labor intensive, like the restaurant business. And so services are very, very heterogeneous, and it's because of that it's very difficult to generalize. And one reason it has been so difficult to get some general agreement is because people talk often about different things when they talk about services. I would like to make two more points. The first one is that because of the history, services were considered non-productive. Largely because services were related to servants in some way. People thought of services as something non-productive. Productive was to create a good, to create something tangible. Services were not considered productive. And I think this is a major attitude that has to be changed, because otherwise we cannot understand services, and also we cannot understand how much services are important also to goods. There is a term that is very difficult to explain, which is embodied services, or services embodied in goods. And actually much of the service is embodied in goods, because when I buy a television, I don't buy just the good itself, I buy the research and development that went into it. I buy the quality control of that. I buy the guarantee that I have after that. All these are services, but these services are sold not as services separated, but as goods. Some services are of course separated and are offered separately than the good. It's important to understand this difference, to understand some of the differences in the world trade, and that's the second point I wanted to make. For many years people felt services are non-tradable. Now the reason people thought that services were not tradable is mainly because of what I described before, the fact that you have to have the consumer of the service and the supplier of the service in proximity to each other. And everybody used to give the example of the barber. You cannot have a haircut unless you sit in the barber chair. You cannot simply send your head to the barber and the barber has to come to you, or you have to go to him. If you are not there, you cannot get the service. And because of that, there was a feeling that services cannot be tradable. Services are very much location specific, done in every specific location. That's not true for many reasons, but let me just give some examples. Transportation is a service, and of course, by its very nature, it's tradable. Airlines are tradable. Tourism moves from one country to another. And today, even more and more services are movable because of major breakthroughs in telecommunication and computers. We can talk to each other when you are in Arkansas and I'm in North Carolina through electronic mail. As a matter of fact, I can be in India and you can be in Australia and we can talk through electronic mail. So lots of things can be done. Lots of advice, legal advice, for example, can be given by fax, by telephone, by electronic mail, by all kinds of methods. That does not even mean that anybody moves from one country to another. And because of all these reasons, there is much more international trade in services, and these services have been growing very fast. Not only that, there is also a very big growth in foreign direct investments, namely in service firms following their multinational clients going into different countries to offer the different services. If this is a hotel chain or an airline or auditing services of an accounting firm. And foreign direct investments in services are now about 40% of the stock of the foreign direct investments, and since they're growing very fast, they're even much higher percentage, about 50 or 60% of the flow of foreign direct investments in the last few years. So this basically, the differences are what I said before, the inseparability of the services, the heterogeneity of the services, the intangibility of the services, and the fact that services cannot be stored. You cannot have inventory of services because they're perishable. Now, it's true that some goods are also perishable. You cannot have ice cream held for a very long time, but most goods are not, and most services are, and in this sense, these are the major differences.
Well, let me turn to Professor Subbarao. We know that services are very labor-intensive type of industries, and some people contend over a period of time, perhaps especially in the international trade, the comparative advantage may shift away from the developed countries to the developing countries because of this labor-intensive nature of the services industries. Now, as an expert of HRM, human resource management, how do you look at these services industries, and what are your thoughts, especially to make the services industries more competitive, both domestically and internationally in the developing countries like India?
Okay. Well, the human resource management implications in the service industry is very significant. When I refer to service industries, I refer normally to health services, education services, and financial service industries. And all these service industries need highly professional human resources. And the most important thing is these professionals are always in constant contact with the client. And unless and otherwise these highly trained professionals are satisfied with the organizational practices, they will not give the satisfactory service to the client. Now, coming to the developed countries, they have an advantage right now in terms of the availability of human resources, the qualified human resources. According to studies conducted in the United States relating to the future projections, the developing countries produce right now about 50% of the college graduates, whereas in the past, their contribution of the college graduates worldwide was only 29%. So the developed countries' proportion of the qualified graduates is declining, and at the same time, the demand for the quality services is increasing. So they have a problem in terms of the availability of services, whereas the developed countries, they have these qualified people. So if they want to improve their competitive ability in service sector, what all they have to do is improve the management practices. And in order to improve, they have to make them feel that they are involved, they are a part of the organization. And in order to do that, they have to feel they are empowered. In other words, they have to be given some discretion in providing the kind of service that the client needs, rather than the boss telling them what to do and how to do. And particularly the professionals don't like somebody dictating them how to do, and when they are asked to do or when they are dictated to do, they react. And when they react, they don't, consumer doesn't get the kind of service that he requires. So in that sense, the developing countries have available human resources, but all they need to do is improve their human resource management practices, and then they will have a very high competitive ability in the service industry.
That takes us to, since you touched upon the professional type of services, I would like to get back to Professor Harone to raise this issue of professional services, especially in the Indian context. Given the fact that everybody says we have a large, technically trained workforce, which is supposed to be second or third in the world, what could be the nature of these professional services and perhaps some of the prospects in terms of the professional services and their trade from the perspectives of India? First, what is the nature of these professional services? Are they different from other types of services? And what do you see some of the prospects for trade in these services?
Let me first respond to your question about the differences, and then I'll go to the question of India. Professional business services, as their name implies, are first of all professionals. And as professionals, they're very highly skilled and usually need to be licensed. Not always. Some professions, like management consultants, do not need to be licensed, but auditors need to be licensed, lawyers need to be licensed, and so on. And they have a very strict ethical code of standards that is usually enforced by the profession itself. Because of the nature of the profession, what the client buys is usually expertise. Sometimes the client buys experience, accumulated knowledge. Very rarely the client buys the ability to do things efficiently. In advertising or market research, you have consultants that specialize in efficiently carrying market research. In what America calls headhunting, to find some new manager, you may have the efficient ways of doing it, and therefore you deliver the services. But the major thing about professionals is that they are professionals, namely they are highly skilled. And first of all, this is related to what was discussed before, namely the human resource part of it. Because the professional can work on their own. They don't have to be part of a firm. As a matter of fact, in most professions, one is not allowed to incorporate. You have to take the risk of facing partnership. And therefore, there is a tendency for many people to say, why should I work for the large firm? I might as well work on my own. And it's a very interesting question of why do we have some large firms in accounting or in management consulting, and we have less large firms in legal profession, for example. But coming back to the question of training people and motivating people, in professional business services, this is the most essential thing. Because the major asset go home every day. The major asset are the human beings, and if these human beings are not treated rightly, they will leave the firm with all their accumulated experience. The other part of it is also related to human resources, because in order to have a very successful professional business service firm, one has to develop some kind of culture of the firm. Because if the client takes, I don't want to mention names, but a certain large global management consultant, instead of taking you or me and pay 3 times more than we would charge, he would want to get a very special thing. And these consulting firms, they are young MBAs, and they have to somehow mold them into some culture that will make them deliver the services in the right way. Now, all this, I think, is related to India in several ways. First of all, for India to be developed, it needs an infrastructure of professional services. And, of course, it has these services. It has its own accountant, it has its own lawyers, and so on and so forth. These people may gain by having exposure to what was learned in other countries. And if India will allow interchange of work, I think it will be beneficial to the development process of India, not necessarily to the profession in the very narrow sense. For example, in the specific case of accountants, American accounting firms develop very, very sophisticated methods of auditing with computers by all kinds of different alliances, partnership, and different other networking ways of doing this thing. So I think the major impact of the professional is in terms of the development of a country, not necessarily in terms of employment of different people. But at the same time, professional business services have become more and more globalized. They follow their clients, especially the accounting firms. When the large Ford, General Motors, IBM, and so on of the world needed attestation of the financial statements in 100 different countries, they wanted to work with one firm. They didn't want to work with 100 different firms in 100 different countries. So the large accounting firms had to find some way to follow these clients. And these large accounting firms work also in India, and they train Indians. And Indians learn more by working in these firms and become more professional and more sophisticated. And I think that's very important. I also think this is a trend that India cannot stop. And therefore it's very important for India to develop its own competitive advantage to be able to work in this world rather than close itself into the subcontinent.
Professor Aharoni, your comment about that India should open up to outside influences so that they can improve their skills, their competences in various professional services is well made. At the same time, as I travel around this country, many professional services people are also very much concerned about how to become competitive in the international markets, and these three developments in recent years, globalization, privatization and liberalization. So they are wondering, are they going to benefit us, are they going to wipe us out, as there's a lot more inflow of service people from other parts of the world. So here there seems to be sort of a concern which is perhaps justifiable on the part of the how to become competitive, how to face the competition from outside, and how to become competitive in the overseas markets.
I'd just like to make 3 short comments. First of all, every change is frightening. And each time things are changing, people say, we want to know how we'll feel better. This is true since the Industrial Revolution, and usually these changes turn out to be for the better. Secondly, the Indians are very highly educated people. And the Indians, because they are highly educated people, can sell lots of services to other countries, not necessarily only import services into India. So I believe very much that programmers in India, of which there are so many and they are so good, can do a lot of work for multinational firms, for global organizations, for outside India. As an expert. Thirdly, I think the major problem in these things is the question of market access. And market access is partially a technical question. Do you have the right professional licensing and the institutions and the GATT and the agreements and all the things that are discussed in Uruguay round that we did not discuss. But partially it's a question of understanding the other side.
Yes.
Now it is very difficult if you sit in one country and you are never going outside that country and you have all your experience in that country to know what is demanded by a customer in another country. That's not true only for India, it's true for Americans. Americans are very much isolated in their own world, and when they have to sell to another country, they don't always do it so well. I think what happens in the world today is that the multinational enterprises have these global networks, and these global networks will allow the access in the sense that I do not see India, for example, since I use programming as an example, having developed, being able to develop a program like Lotus 1, 2, 3, mainly not because of lack of technical skill, but lack of access to the market, understanding what the customers want, and so on and so forth. But I can certainly see India having some kind of strategic alliance with a programming software firm, selling lots of these services to other countries, and in this way benefiting quite a lot in terms of employment, in terms of export, foreign exchange, etc., etc.
Let me turn to Professor Subbarao on this issue of competitiveness.
Yeah.
I'm sure there must be a lot of human resource management implications.
That's right.
What are your thoughts on that?
I see a threat to the competitive ability of India in the service industry in particular. As you know, the hospitals in the United States and Canada and all the developing countries, they have acute shortage of physicians, nurses, even in the educational institutions because of the aging population. The average age of the professional in North America is about 39 now. And so there is an acute shortage, and what they are going to do is they are going to headhunt these professionals from countries like India. And the immigration rules are also relaxed. So unless and otherwise Indian service industries improve their human resource management practices to motivate them and to keep them at home, they are going to lose these most qualified professionals to the developed countries, and once they lose, the competitive ability is lost for good.
Professor Aharoni and Professor Subbarao, with your permission, I would like to sort of briefly summarize what we have come up with within a short span of 30 minutes or so. We have established that services are becoming an important part of every economy, including developing countries. In the Indian context, perhaps services have to play an important role in the development process because they provide the infrastructure which is necessary for not only the advancement of the domestic market but also for the development of their international trade. And within this context, the three key developments, namely globalization, liberalization and privatization processes which have been initiated recently, are likely to have both adverse impacts and at the same time may open up opportunities. So that's what we sort of conclude, saying the Indian services organizations should get exposed to outside influences in order to become competitive. First, of course, within the domestic market, but that sort of competitiveness perhaps would also enable them to be successfully competitive in the overseas markets.